I never thought owning a swimming pool could spark a neighborhood war. But then again, I had never met Karen, our HOA president and self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac. One sunny afternoon, she marched right into my backyard, pointed at my pool, and declared with a straight face, "This belongs to the community now." At first I laughed. Surely no one could be serious about hijacking someone else's private pool. But Karen wasn't joking. Within days, she was sending HOA notices, rallying neighbors, and even planning a community pool party at my house. She strutted around like she already owned it. That's when I realized if Karen wanted a party, she'd get one. Just not the kind she imagined. Because the night before her grand event, I did something that left her standing in front of the entire neighborhood, absolutely humiliated. Before I tell you exactly what happened, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community stretch across the globe. When I first bought this house, the pool wasn't even the selling point. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful. A sparkling rectangular stretch of blue framed by clean white tiles and a row of palm trees I had planted myself. But for me, the real treasure was peace. I'd spent 20 years grinding away at a corporate job, saving every dime I could to finally buy a place that felt like mine, truly mine. The first weekend after moving in, I remember floating on a cheap inflatable raft, staring up at the clear sky and thinking, this is it. This is the calm I've earned. My kids splashed at the shallow end, my wife brought out lemonade, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. That pool became more than just a patch of water, it was a symbol. A little oasis where my family could forget the noise of the world. Of course, peace in an HOA neighborhood is always conditional. I knew that going in. The real estate agent had warned me. The board here is active. That was the polite way of saying nosy, pushy, and occasionally tyrannical. I figured I could handle it. How bad could some paperwork and lawn inspections really be? At first it wasn't so bad. The HOA sent the usual reminders: trim the hedges, don't leave your trash bins out overnight, replace a mailbox post if it leans too far left. Annoying, sure. Life-ruining, not yet. For a while I kept my head down, paid the dues, and minded my own business. But even during those calm months, there was something unsettling. I noticed Karen early on. You couldn't miss her. She had that aura clipboard in one hand, oversized sunglasses, the kind of brisk walk that screamed authority. Every Saturday she patrolled the street like a general inspecting her troops. Sometimes I'd catch her standing at the corner, staring at my property just a little too long. Other times I'd hear her voice cutting across the neighborhood. That lawn's half an inch too high, or whose recycling bin is out of alignment. Most people just rolled their eyes. Everyone knew Karen lived for the HOA. But for me, there was always a low-level tension, like she was waiting for an excuse. Still, I wasn't going to let her ruin my sanctuary. Those first few months, my family made the most of that pool. Birthday parties, lazy Sunday swims, even nighttime dips under the patio lights. My daughter learned how to float there. My son tried to teach himself cannonballs. Neighbors would sometimes comment, "You've got the nicest yard on the block." And Karen, oh Karen, never said a word. She just glared. It's funny looking back. I should have known the silence meant something was brewing. People like Karen don't stay quiet. They plot. One evening, as the sun was setting and I was grilling by the pool, I overheard her voice from across the fence. She didn't know I was close enough to hear. She was talking to another board member. Well, technically we can classify it as a community amenity. The bylaws are vague. It's unfair for one household to hoard something that benefits everyone. And besides, look at how much water it takes. He should be sharing it. I froze with the spatula in my hand. Sharing it. My stomach dropped, then twisted. Surely I misheard. Surely no sane person would think they could claim another man's private pool. But then a week later, a thin white envelope showed up in my mailbox with the HOA logo stamped across the top. Inside a single page, notice of review. The HOA board will be evaluating the classification of your backyard pool as a potential community resource. I remember laughing at first. It sounded too ridiculous to be real. Like an April Fool's prank, only it was July. I even showed it to my wife. She read it twice, then looked up at me with wide eyes. They can't do that, can they? That was the moment the peace of my little paradise cracked. Over the next few days, I noticed Karen watching more openly. Standing on the sidewalk with her phone out, snapping pictures of my pool like she was gathering evidence for a trial. I'd wave sarcastically and she wouldn't even blink. Just write something down on her clipboard. My kids started to sense something was wrong too. They'd ask, "Dad, are we still going to have the pool this summer?" I told them not to worry. I told myself not to worry. But inside I could feel the storm building. See, the thing about HOA battles is that they're never really about the rules. They're about power. Karen didn't want to swim in my pool. She wanted to own it, to show everyone she could take something that wasn't hers and make it hers by sheer force of will. And when people like that put you in their sights, peace is no longer an option. Looking back now, I realize that was the true beginning of the war. It wasn't when Karen marched into my yard, clipboard raised like a sword. It wasn't when she plastered her smug flyers all over the neighborhood. No, the first shot was that envelope, the quiet declaration that my little oasis was under siege. I didn't know it then, but I was about to learn just how far Karen was willing to go, and how much sweeter it would feel when I finally turned the tables. I've met plenty of difficult people in my life. The office micromanagers, the neighbor who thought mowing the lawn at midnight was acceptable, even the occasional road rager on my morning commute. But nothing, I repeat nothing, compared to the day Karen finally made her grand entrance into my backyard. It was a Tuesday afternoon, hot and sticky, the kind of day when the only logical place to be is floating in cool water with a cold drink in your hand. My kids were splashing around, laughing so hard they sounded like seagulls, and I was stretched out on a deck chair with a glass of iced tea sweating onto the table beside me. I heard the gate latch click, and before I could even stand up, there she was, Karen. Clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon, oversized sunglasses masking whatever expression she thought she was hiding, and that purposeful, almost military stride. She didn't so much enter as she invaded. "Excuse me," she announced, though she was already standing 5 feet from my pool. "We need to talk about this." She pointed one manicured finger stabbing the air toward the water like she was identifying contraband. "Afternoon, Karen," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Hot one today. This pool," she snapped, ignoring the pleasantries. "It isn't properly classified under HOA bylaws. Technically, it qualifies as a shared amenity, which means it doesn't belong to you alone. It belongs to the neighborhood." I sat there for a moment trying to process if I'd actually heard her correctly. Then I chuckled. "That's funny, Karen. Last time I checked, I paid for this house, this yard, and yes, this pool. Unless you secretly chipped in, I'm pretty sure it's mine." She didn't laugh. She pulled out a folded packet of papers from her clipboard and began reading like a lawyer in a courtroom. Section 12, paragraph 3. Shared resources cannot be restricted from residents if they provide a significant benefit to the community. She looked up, lips pursed. This pool is clearly a community benefit. Behind me, my daughter whispered, "Dad, is she serious?" I nodded slightly, never taking my eyes off Karen. "Karen," I said slowly, "this is a private pool in a private yard behind a private fence. It's not a playground. It's not a community garden. You can't just wave a rule book around and claim it." Her smile spread thin and smug. "We'll see. The board will decide." And just like that, she turned and strutted out as if she had already won the case. That was my first real taste of how Karen operated. She didn't argue, she declared. She didn't request, she demanded. And she never, ever asked permission to barge into someone's life. The next day, I found a notice taped to my front door. Failure to comply with HOA rules regarding shared amenities may result in fines. No explanation, no discussion, just a threat dressed in bureaucratic language. By Friday, I caught her again. This time, she was standing outside my fence with 2 other board members, gesturing dramatically as she pointed into my yard. The other 2 nodded along like backup dancers in some HOA musical. I could hear snippets, liability issues, community access, fair use. I stepped outside and called over, "Everything all right over there?" Karen looked at me like a queen interrupted during her royal decree. "We're conducting an inspection. Nothing for you to worry about." "Oh, I'm plenty worried," I shot back, especially when strangers are peeking over my fence like vultures. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, but Karen didn't flinch. "You'll be receiving an official update soon." Sure enough, the next morning another letter arrived. This one claimed I was in violation of community harmony for refusing to cooperate with shared amenities policy. The fine listed at the bottom, $500. $500 for refusing to hand over my pool. Now, I've dealt with extortion before. Usually, it involves some shady mechanic who swears your car needs 3 new parts that don't even exist. But to have my own neighborhood HOA try it, that was a new low. I started to feel the stress seeping into daily life. My wife kept asking if we should just pay the fine and hope it went away. My son didn't want to swim anymore, convinced Karen will come yell at us. Even the neighbors began whispering, some sympathetic, others curious to see how it would all play out. And through it all, Karen kept popping up like a bad commercial you can't skip. At the mailbox. On my sidewalk. Even once, when I was taking out the trash, she sauntered up and muttered, "You know, this would all be easier if you just cooperated." That was when I realized Karen didn't just want my pool. She wanted control. She wanted everyone in this neighborhood to know she was in charge, and breaking me would be her trophy. I smiled at her that night, the kind of smile that says you don't know what you've started. Because while she thought she was tightening her grip, all she was really doing was fueling my resolve. Karen had crossed the line. And if she thought she could take what was mine, she had no idea what I was capable of when pushed too far. The war had officially begun. If Karen's first visit was a spark, the weeks that followed were a wildfire. She didn't just stop at a letter or a fine, oh no. She was determined to make my life as miserable as possible until I bent to her will. It started with the mailbox. I walked outside one morning to find a bright orange slip taped across the front non-compliant post structure. According to Karen, my mailbox stood half an inch too tall, violating community symmetry standards. I measured it myself. It was perfectly within the regulation range, but the fine, another $100. 2 days later, another notice arrived. My lawn was exceeding acceptable lushness. I'm not making that up. Apparently watering it 3 times a week was creating visual disparity with adjacent yards. Translation, it looked too green compared to Karen's brittle patch of weeds. Fine $75. At first I thought maybe she was just being petty. But then the real assault began. Karen called a special board meeting to discuss the pool amenity. I wasn't invited, of course, but word spreads fast in a neighborhood where gossip moves quicker than Wi-Fi. A neighbor slipped me a copy of the agenda, and there it was in bold type, motion to reclassify pool as shared HOA asset. I nearly choked on my coffee. Shared HOA asset, that was lawyer speak for steal it outright. The next morning as I pulled out of the driveway, I noticed signs taped to light poles up and down the street. Community pool access, coming soon. Each one stamped with the HOA logo. And guess what picture they used? A zoomed-in photo of my pool kids splashing in the background without my permission. I ripped one down in disbelief. By the time I drove back home, 3 more had been posted. That evening, Karen strutted past my yard while I was grilling. "Exciting news, isn't it?" she said, smirking. "The neighborhood is really looking forward to using our pool." "Funny," I replied, flipping a burger. "I don't recall signing a lease agreement with the entire block." Her smile widened. "You'll come around." But I wasn't laughing anymore. My family was feeling the pressure. My son refused to invite friends over, afraid Karen would scold them. My wife confessed she dreaded checking the mail, certain another notice would be waiting. Even my daughter asked if we'd have to move away to keep the pool. I tried to reassure them, but privately the frustration was eating at me. I wasn't just fighting for a pool, I was fighting for our peace of mind, our right to enjoy our home without being stalked by clipboard patrol. Then came the cherry on top, a certified letter hand-delivered by none other than Karen herself. She knocked on my door, shoved the envelope into my chest, and said with icy satisfaction, "You've been officially fined $1,000 for obstructing community use of a shared resource, payable within 30 days. I opened it after she left, and sure enough, there it was. A $1,000 fine for restricting amenity access. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the letter in the grill. The audacity was staggering. But neighbors were starting to buy into her narrative. Some genuinely thought the HOA had a legal claim to my pool. Others were just excited at the idea of free swim access. I overheard whispers on evening walks. "Did you hear Karen's getting us a pool?" Kids chattered about pool parties, parents debated rules about floaties and sunscreen. It was surreal, like the entire neighborhood had already accepted her fantasy as fact. And Karen thrived on it. She marched through the streets like a conquering hero, bragging to anyone who would listen. "We're so close. Just a little more paperwork and the pool will officially be ours." Meanwhile, I was drowning in notices and fines. They came daily now, sometimes 2 at a time. Improper hedge trimming, unauthorized patio furniture, excessive bird activity. Apparently having a bird feeder violated wildlife disturbance policies. Each one stacked onto my record like ammunition in Karen's arsenal. My wife urged me to hire a lawyer. "This is harassment," she said, and she was right. But I knew Karen's game. If I jumped to lawsuits, she'd spin it as me being combative, the villain of the neighborhood. I needed a different approach, one that would expose her for what she really was, a dictator drunk on power. Still, the pressure wore on me. I found myself clenching my jaw at night, waking up to the sound of phantom knocks on the door. Every time I saw that clipboard silhouette through my blinds, my blood boiled. One evening, as I tried to relax with a book, I heard laughter outside. I peeked through the curtains and saw Karen standing at the curb with half a dozen neighbors passing around what looked like flyers. She pointed toward my house, grinning like a magician unveiling a trick. I snuck outside after they left and grabbed one of the flyers. You're invited. Community pool party, Saturday 2 p.m. Drinks, music, family fun, at the HOA pool. And there once again was my backyard, my pool, my family's sanctuary now, the advertised venue for Karen's personal victory parade. I stood there in the dark flyer, shaking in my hand, and realized something: Karen wasn't going to stop. She wouldn't rest until she paraded the whole neighborhood through my gate towels in hand, celebrating her conquest. But if she wanted a party, then I'd give her one she'd never forget. That night, lying awake in bed, I began to hatch the plan. A plan so simple yet so devastating that Karen's empire would crumble in a single afternoon. She had declared war, but she had no idea what kind of man she was really up against. By the time the flyers hit every mailbox, Karen wasn't just whispering about the pool, she was shouting it from the rooftops. It wasn't enough to harass me with fines or stick notes to my door. No, Karen wanted a show. She wanted the whole neighborhood to believe her fantasy before reality had a chance to catch up. On Monday morning, my wife walked in from the driveway holding a glossy, full-color flyer. She dropped it on the counter like it was radioactive. Across the top, in giant bubble letters, Summer Bash at the HOA pool. Below it, a picture of my backyard, complete with my kid's inflatable flamingo floating right in the center. "Tell me this is a joke," she said, crossing her arms. I picked it up, read it twice, then laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Oh, it's a joke, all right. Just not the kind she thinks. The flyer wasn't just an invitation, it was a manifesto. Games for the kids, burgers on the grill, live DJ performance. Karen had gone all out, promising entertainment, food, and an afternoon of community bonding. The kicker, she'd printed her own name at the bottom as the host. Hosted by Karen, HOA president. The audacity was breathtaking. She hadn't asked me. She hadn't even notified me. She had just decided my private pool, my private yard, would be the centerpiece of her HOA circus. By Tuesday, neighbors started asking casual questions in the street. "Hey, do you mind if we bring folding chairs? Do you need help setting up the grill?" Kids were buzzing about water balloons and ice cream. Karen even had the gall to march past me one evening and say, "Make sure the pool is cleaned and ready. People are expecting a good time." That's when I realized she wasn't planning a pool party. She was planning my humiliation. She wanted me standing on my own back patio, helpless, as dozens of neighbors marched in and took over my yard. She wanted to prove to everyone that she held the power, not me. And if I resisted, she'd spin it into a spectacle. Selfish homeowner denies community fun. Either way, she thought she'd win. What Karen didn't realize is that I'd already shifted gears. The moment I saw that flyer, the wheels of revenge started turning. At dinner that night, my wife asked, "What are we going to do?" Her voice carried that mix of frustration and fear I'd grown too used to hearing since Karen declared war. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and said, "We're going to give her exactly what she asked for." My son frowned. "So we're letting them have the party?" I shook my head. "Not quite. You'll see." But before I could put my plan into action, Karen kept pushing. On Wednesday morning, she stood outside with 2 HOA board members, inspecting my fence line as if measuring where to set up tiki torches. One of them even gestured at my patio, discussing seating arrangements. I walked out, arms folded. "Can I help you?" I asked. Karen turned with that smug smile. "Just making sure everything's in order for Saturday. We expect at least 50 guests." 50, I nearly choked. "Are you out of your mind?" "Not at all," she replied. "In fact, we may have closer to 70. People are very excited. I suggest you stock up on refreshments." And with that, she turned on her heel clipboard under her arm, already writing notes for her grand production. The arrogance was unbelievable. She had transformed from neighborhood busybody to full-blown event planner, all while treating me like the unpaid staff of her HOA carnival. But inside, I was calm. Because the more she bragged, the more confident I became in my plan. I wasn't going to fight her with shouting matches or lawsuits. I wasn't going to barricade the gate or call the cops. No, I was going to let her walk right into her own disaster. Thursday evening, I tested the equipment. A pump, some hoses, a discreet setup that would run overnight. By morning, my beautiful blue pool would be nothing more than a sunken pit of concrete. I could already picture it, the looks on their faces when they arrived, swimsuits on, towels in hand, only to be greeted by a giant hole in the ground. Karen standing there with her clipboard, forced to explain how her grand party had evaporated, literally. The image made me laugh so hard, I nearly pulled a muscle. Still, I kept my poker face in public. On Friday, Karen paraded up to me again. "I hope you're not planning any last-minute stunts," she warned. I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Wouldn't dream of it." Good, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Because this event will really bring the community together. Everyone will remember it. Oh, I muttered under my breath as she strutted away, they'll remember it all right. That night, after the kids went to bed, I stood by the pool in the quiet glow of the patio lights. The water shimmered peacefully, reflecting the stars above. I almost felt a pang of guilt. This pool had been my sanctuary, my family's refuge. But sometimes you have to burn down a fortress to save it. And if draining a pool meant draining Karen's ego dry in the process, then it was worth every drop. I turned on the pump, heard the gurgle of water flowing through the hose, and watched the first ripple vanish down into the earth. My plan was in motion. By sunrise, there would be nothing left for Karen to claim, nothing left for her to celebrate. Just one giant empty reminder that you can't steal what was never yours. Friday evening was strangely quiet, too quiet. Usually by then, Karen would be strutting around with her clipboard, rehearsing her grand pool party takeover for anyone unlucky enough to cross her path. But that night, she was nowhere to be seen. The absence didn't comfort me. If I'd learned anything about Karen, it was that her silence meant she was cooking up something loud. I sat on the edge of the pool, the pump humming steadily as the water level dropped inch by inch. Each gurgle through the hose felt like a small victory. I imagined her face when she saw what I was doing, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to smile. That's when I heard it, the sharp slam of my backyard gate. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice cracked the night like a whip. I turned, and there she was, hands on hips, sunglasses gone, but fury blazing in her eyes. Behind her, 2 board members hovered nervously, clearly dragged along for backup. I stayed seated, calm as stone. "Evening, Karen. Don't you evening me," she screeched, storming closer, until she stood over me like a prosecutor ready to deliver the death sentence. "You can't touch that pool. You're sabotaging community property." "Community property," I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, I don't see your name on the deed, or theirs." I gestured at the board members, who suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Her face turned red, almost purple. "You think you can just drain it? After everything we've planned? After I promised the neighborhood? There at Island." I stood up slowly, towering just enough to meet her glare. "This was never about the neighborhood, was it, Karen? It's about you. Your big party. Your big show. Your chance to play queen." She jabbed a finger in my chest. "You have no right to ruin this." I glanced down at her finger, then back into her eyes and chuckled. "You keep saying that word, right. But here's the thing. I do have the right. Every inch of this yard, every tile of this pool, every drop of this water mine, paid for with my money, maintained with my effort. The only thing I don't own out here is that clipboard you love, waving around like a crown." The board members shuffled uncomfortably. One whispered, "Maybe we should," but Karen snapped her head toward them, silencing them instantly. Then she leaned in close, her voice a venomous hiss. "If you drain this pool, I'll destroy you. Fines, lawsuits. I'll drag your name through every HOA record until you choke on debt. You won't last a month here." It was supposed to scare me. Maybe a week ago it would have. But not anymore. Something had shifted inside me. I laughed, not a nervous laugh, but a deep belly laugh that caught her completely off guard. "Destroy me, Karen, you've already tried. The fines, the flyers, the gossip. And yet, here I am, still standing, still smiling." I pointed at the pool where the water line had already sunk a foot lower. "And tomorrow, when you show up with your 70 guests and their floaties, you'll be standing in front of nothing but cracked concrete." "Who's gonna look like the fool then?" Her jaw dropped. For once, Karen didn't have a quick retort. "You wouldn't dare," she finally managed. "Oh, I dare," I said, stepping closer until we were eye to eye. "And here's the kicker, you can't stop me. Call the cops, they'll laugh in your face. Call the board, they'll walk away, just like your little entourage here." I glanced at the 2 members, who immediately avoided eye contact. Karen's fists clenched, her whole body trembling. "You'll regret this," she spat, before storming out the gate, slamming it so hard the latch rattled loose. The board members scurried after her like embarrassed shadows. For a long moment I stood there alone, the night air buzzing with the aftershock of confrontation. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was exhilaration. For the first time I felt like I wasn't playing defense anymore. I wasn't the cornered homeowner praying the HOA would leave him alone. I was the one holding the cards. I sat back down beside the pool, watching the pump do its quiet work. Every gallon that drained was another nail in Karen's coffin of credibility. She'd promised the neighborhood a grand party. She'd bragged, boasted, strutted like she already owned the place. Tomorrow, all of that would collapse in an instant. And here's the thing about bullies like Karen, they thrive on the illusion of power. Take that illusion away, expose them for what they are, and they crumble. Tomorrow, Karen wasn't just going to lose her pool party. She was going to lose the neighborhood. Inside the house, my wife peeked out the window. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. "Better than okay," I replied. "Tomorrow's the turning point." She hesitated. "Are you sure about this?" I turned to look at her, the patio lights glinting off the shrinking pool. "Absolutely. She wants a show. Let's give her one she'll never forget." That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the confrontation over and over. Karen's threats, her trembling rage, her promise that I'd regret this. But all I could think was how close she was to her downfall. Tomorrow, her empire would crack like the empty shell of my drained pool, and I couldn't wait to watch it happen. Revenge doesn't always come in fireworks. Sometimes it comes in the quiet hum of a pump, the gurgle of water slipping away unseen, and the satisfaction of knowing every drop carries you closer to victory. That night, after Karen's meltdown at my gate, I knew I couldn't back down. She'd threatened lawsuits, debt, public humiliation. Fine. Let her swing with everything she had. I wasn't just standing my ground anymore, I was pulling the rug out from under her throne. The plan itself was simple, almost laughably so. Pools drain slower than most people realize, but with the right pump, a long enough hose, and a bit of patience, you can make tens of thousands of gallons vanish overnight. I had rented the pump under the guise of routine maintenance, just in case Karen had one of her spies lurking at the equipment store. I set it up at dusk, hidden by the hedge line, the hose running discreetly out toward the storm drain at the end of the street. By 10 o'clock, the water was already a foot lower. The once pristine mirror of blue tiles now reflected back at me like a shrinking secret. I pulled a chair onto the patio, poured myself a bourbon, and watched the water swirl away under the stars. It felt therapeutic. For weeks, Karen had been clawing at my sanity, circling like a shark smelling blood. And here I was, reclaiming control 1 gallon at a time. But don't get me wrong, it wasn't without suspense. Every few minutes, I'd glance nervously toward the gate, half expecting Karen to burst in again with her board member minions. Every flicker of headlights on the street made my heart race. If she caught me in the act, she'd twist it into proof of my sabotage. So I treated it like a spy mission. I kept the lights dim, the pump shielded behind patio furniture. Even my dog seemed to sense the gravity of the operation. He lay quietly by my feet, not a single bark, as if he too wanted to see Karen toppled. By midnight, the pool was half empty. The shallow end was already bone dry, leaving only the deep end swirling with the last stubborn feet of water. The inflatable flamingo, once so cheerful now, lay pathetically on its side, squeaking against the tiles as the waterline fell. It was a sad sight, but also hilarious. I imagined Karen's pool party guests arriving tomorrow, walking through the gate with floaties around their waists, only to see that limp flamingo gasping for air on the dry floor of an empty pool. It was poetic comedy. Around 1 in the morning, I took a break, leaning back in the chair and closing my eyes. The pump droned steadily like a lullaby of revenge. My wife stepped out in her robe, rubbing her eyes. "You're really going through with this," she whispered. I grinned. "Oh, I'm not just going through with it. I'm enjoying every second." She shook her head, half amused, half exasperated. "You know, most people would call a lawyer. Most people don't live under Karen," I replied. "Besides, this is better. She's built her entire reputation on that party. Tomorrow she'll have nothing." She smiled, faintly kissed my cheek, and went back inside. I stayed. This was my battle, and I wasn't going to abandon the front lines. By dawn, the pool was drained completely. Not a drop left. What once shimmered as the jewel of my backyard now looked like an abandoned construction site, cracked concrete, stray leaves, and that poor flamingo deflated in defeat. I walked around the edge, hands on my hips, and felt a surge of pride. Mission accomplished. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to ensure the scene would be unforgettable, so I staged it. I left the flamingo in the center, dramatic as a fallen soldier. I dragged in a few folding chairs and tipped them sideways, as if a party had already been wrecked. And for the pièce de résistance, I hung one of Karen's own flyers on the gate, with big red letters scrawled across it. Pool closed. Private property. Standing back, I admired the sight. It was art, my own masterpiece of petty vengeance. Still, I couldn't shake the butterflies in my stomach. I knew tomorrow wasn't just about an empty pool. It was about Karen's reaction. Would she rage, cry, spin some wild excuse, or would she finally crumble under the weight of her own arrogance? I barely slept that night. Every hour I woke and peeked out the window, staring at the hollow shell where my pool had been. Each time I smiled. Tomorrow was the showdown. Tomorrow the entire neighborhood would see the truth. By 8 in the morning, I was already on the patio, coffee in hand, waiting. The sun climbed higher, lighting up the emptiness for all to see. From across the street, I spotted Karen bustling about in her driveway, arms full of decorations, streamers, balloons, even a fold-out table. She wore a wide-brimmed hat like some Hollywood starlet, preparing for her red carpet moment. The arrogance was staggering. She was so certain victory was hers. So sure she'd parade through my gate and bask in applause. And that certainty, that blind hubris, was exactly why this was going to work. Because sometimes revenge doesn't need explosions or chaos. Sometimes all it takes is letting someone hoist themselves up on their own pedestal and then watching as the pedestal collapses under their weight. Tomorrow, Karen's fall would echo louder than every HOA fine, every smug smile, every clipboard note she'd ever thrown my way, and I was ready to savor every second. Saturday morning felt like waiting for curtain call on a stage play. My backyard was the set, the drained pool was the centerpiece, and the entire neighborhood would soon be the audience. All I had to do was sit back, sip my coffee, and let Karen walk straight into her own humiliation. By noon, I saw the first signs of movement, folding chairs under arms, coolers rattling with ice, kids bouncing along with pool noodles twice their size. They streamed down the sidewalk like festival goers, following the Pied Piper of chaos, Karen herself. She was dressed for glory, oversized sun hat, bright floral cover-up, clipboard tucked proudly under her arm like a queen carrying her scepter. Behind her, 2 HOA board members carried a speaker system, grim expressions plastered on their faces. And behind them, a crowd of at least 50 people chatting excitedly about cannonballs and sunscreen. Ready for the big day, one neighbor called, waving as though I'd been in on this plan the whole time. I raised my coffee cup in mock salute. Couldn't be more ready. Karen caught the tone, but she didn't care. She was buzzing too hard on her own delusion. When she reached my gate, she swung it open with a flourish. "Welcome everyone. Step inside. Your community pool awaits." The crowd surged forward, towels draped over shoulders, sunglasses gleaming. They rounded the corner onto my patio and stopped dead in their tracks. Silence. Pure stunned silence. Where there should have been glittering blue water was nothing but a cavernous pit of sun-bleached concrete. The inflatable flamingo lay collapsed on its side, its face twisted into a cartoonish grimace. A couple of stray leaves swirled across the cracked floor. It looked less like a party venue, and more like the aftermath of an apocalypse. Karen froze mid-stride, her grand gesture suspended in the air like a glitching robot. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of her speaker system being set down on the patio. Then, a little boy's voice rang out. Where's the water?" Laughter erupted. Not cruel at first, just nervous, awkward chuckles rippling through the crowd. But within seconds, it grew louder, sharper, more mocking. Neighbors clutched their stomachs, trying to hold in the giggles. Even one of the board members covered his mouth, his shoulders shaking. Karen spun around her face, redder than a sunburn. This isn't supposed to," she stumbled, grasping for words. I leaned casually against the patio railing, swirling my coffee. "Problem, Karen." She shot me a death glare, then turned back to the crowd. "There must have been a malfunction. Yes, a plumbing issue. Temporary setback. We'll reschedule." But the neighbors weren't buying it. A woman in a sundress crossed her arms. "Reschedule? You said the pool was ready." "Yeah," another man chimed in. "You've been bragging about this for weeks." Karen stammered. It was supposed to be. That was my cue." I raised my voice calm and measured so everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to disappoint you, but this isn't a community pool. It's my private property. Always has been. What you see here is what happens when someone tries to claim ownership of what isn't theirs." A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Some looked embarrassed. Others looked furious, not at me, but at Karen. One neighbor spoke up. "Wait, you mean she lied?" Karen whirled around, panicked. "I didn't lie. The bylaws don't give you the right to steal a man's pool." I cut in, pulling out the flyer she'd plastered all over the neighborhood. I held it up for everyone to see. This is fraud. Using my property without permission. Hosting an event you had no authority to plan." The laughter returned, this time sharper, tinged with anger. A teenager shouted, "Nice job, Karen. Best pool party ever." His friends doubled over, clutching each other in hysterics. Karen's face crumpled. She tried to regain control, waving her clipboard like a desperate conductor trying to salvage a broken symphony. "Enough, everyone. Calm down. This is just a mistake." But it was too late. The tide had turned. Neighbors began trickling out, shaking their heads, muttering about wasted time. Parents dragged disappointed kids back toward the street. Even her loyal board members quietly packed up the speaker system and walked away. Karen was left standing at the edge of the empty pool, her sun hat drooping clipboard trembling in her hands. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. I finished my coffee, set the cup down, and strolled over. "Well, Karen," I said softly, "just for her you wanted a party. I'd say this one was unforgettable." Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. I leaned closer, delivering the final blow. "Next time you think about stealing from me, remember what happened here. You can throw fines, letters, threats, but in the end it's just paper. And paper doesn't hold water." Her eyes flicked toward the empty pool, and I swear for a second I thought she might faint. With that, I turned and walked inside, leaving her to face the ruins of her ego. From my window, I watched her eventually gather her things, her sun hat, her clipboard, her shredded dignity, and trudge back down the street. Alone. The queen of the cul-de-sac had been dethroned. And the best part, she'd done it to herself. If I thought Karen would crawl away quietly after the disaster, I underestimated her resilience, or rather her delusion. By Monday morning, the HOA inbox and my mailbox were exploding with paperwork. Certified letters, threats of legal escalation, even a fat envelope stamped urgent that looked like it had been drafted by a law firm. Of course I opened it. And sure enough, there it was, notice of pending legal action. According to Karen, I had willfully destroyed community property by draining the pool, causing irreparable emotional harm to the neighborhood. She was demanding $10, 0 inches damages, plus the immediate transfer of my pool to HOA management. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my cereal. Irreparable emotional harm. My son leaned over reading the letter and said, "Dad, is that even real?" "No, son," I said, wiping tears from my eyes. "That's what desperation looks like when it's printed on expensive paper." But here's the thing, Karen didn't realize she'd already lost long before this letter. Because while she was planning her grand takeover, I'd been quietly preparing my own arsenal. Weeks earlier, when the first notices started piling up, I'd called a friend of mine, an attorney who specialized in property law. I told him everything. The fines, the flyers, the threats. He chuckled and said, "Send me your deed and HOA bylaws. Let's see what we're working with." And oh, did we find gold. Turns out my property line was crystal clear. Not only did I own the pool outright, but my lot had been grandfathered in with exemptions from certain HOA clauses. The bylaws Karen kept quoting, they didn't even apply to my yard. She had built her entire crusade on a foundation of sand. So when she sent her fancy letter, I was ready. I drafted a calm, polite response attaching copies of the deed, the survey maps, and the exemption clause. My lawyer added a note reminding the HOA that filing frivolous lawsuits could expose them to counterclaims. Then, just to twist the knife, I added a final paragraph. As a courtesy, I've arranged professional pool maintenance this week to restore the pool to full functionality. Any claims of property damage are moot. Kindly direct further correspondence to my attorney. Yes, you read that right. While Karen was accusing me of destroying community property, I had already scheduled a maintenance crew to refill and reseal the pool. By Wednesday, the water would be back sparkling cleaner than ever. My family could swim again while Karen was left choking on her own lies. When I dropped that response in the mail, I swear I felt 10 pounds lighter. The next HOA board meeting was the stuff of legend. I didn't even have to attend, neighbors filled me in afterward. Karen stormed in, waving my letter like it was a smoking gun. She ranted, screamed, accused me of sabotage. But when she read the exemption clause aloud, the room went silent. One board member finally muttered, "Wait, so the pool was never HOA property." Karen tried to spin it. He manipulated the paperwork. He tricked us. But the evidence was undeniable. My deed was clear, the bylaws unambiguous. For the first time, the board realized Karen had led them into a battle they couldn't win. And just like that, her army began to crumble. Neighbors who once laughed at her jokes now avoided eye contact. Parents who'd hyped up the pool party muttered about being embarrassed. Even her closest allies on the board started distancing themselves. One actually resigned on the spot, saying he refused to be part of harassment. Karen. She doubled down, of course. She always doubled down. She slammed her clipboard on the table and shouted, "This isn't over," but her voice cracked and everyone knew it was. Back at home, I leaned against the patio railing, watching the maintenance crew refill my pool. The hose hissed, the water sparkled, and slowly the oasis I loved returned. My wife stood beside me, her hand in mine. "Feels good to see it full again," she said. "Better than good," I replied. "It feels like victory." And that was the twist Karen never saw coming. She thought she'd humiliate me with a pool party. She thought draining the pool was an act of destruction. But in reality, it was the perfect trap. Because the pool wasn't gone, it was reborn. Clean, restored, and more private than ever. And Karen, she wasn't just humiliated, she was exposed. Exposed as a liar, exposed as a bully, exposed as a queen without a crown. From that moment on, her clipboard lost its power. Her notices went unanswered. Her threats turned into whispers no one cared to hear. I didn't just win back my pool, I won back my peace. The neighborhood was never the same after that Saturday. For years, Karen had been the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac, her clipboard, a weapon her word treated like law. But in one afternoon, standing before an empty pool, a jeering crowd and undeniable proof her empire crumbled. By the following week, the flyers disappeared from the polls. The smug patrols up and down the block stopped. The endless fines, the little orange slips, the friendly reminders tucked under my doormat gone. It was as if the HOA had collectively decided that Karen's reign of terror wasn't worth the embarrassment she'd brought on them. Of course, Karen didn't vanish overnight. She still marched around muttering about legal options and misinterpretations, but no one cared anymore. The board stopped backing her. Neighbors stopped listening. Even her closest allies, the ones who used to shadow her with measuring tapes and complaint forms, kept their distance. One afternoon, I watched her from my kitchen window. She stood at the corner of the street clipboard, hanging limp at her side, trying to hand out notices that no one would take. Kids on bikes zipped past, laughing. A couple walking their dog crossed the street to avoid her. She was still there, but she was invisible. Meanwhile, my pool was back to its former glory. The maintenance crew had done a spectacular job: cleaner water, resealed tiles, even a new filter system I hadn't bothered to install before. My family dove in like nothing had happened, splashing and laughing in the sunlight. But for me, every ripple in that water carried a deeper meaning. It wasn't just a pool anymore, it was a trophy. Proof that I could stand up to the HOA machine and win. The best part, the neighbors who once believed Karen's lies now saw me in a new light. They came by with sheepish smiles. Sorry about all that. We didn't realize. A couple even offered to chip in for the maintenance costs, though I waved them off. Their apologies were payment enough. But the crowning moment came 2 weeks later at the monthly HOA meeting. Normally, Karen would open the gathering with her usual sermon about community standards and compliance. This time, she barely spoke. When she finally rose to address the group, her voice was shaky, her words defensive. We must remember, she stammered, that certain misunderstandings do not reflect the integrity of the board. Someone in the back cut her off. You lied about the pool, Karen. You wasted everyone's time. The room buzzed with agreement. Another voice chimed in. Yeah, and you fined me for my Christmas lights last year. Was that a misunderstanding too? Karen's face turned crimson. She clutched her clipboard like a life raft, but it was no use. The crowd smelled weakness. What followed was a cascade of grievances. Neighbors listing every petty fine, every unnecessary lecture, every humiliation Karen had dished out over the years. For the first time, she had no allies. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to censure her. She wasn't removed yet, but her authority was gutted. She no longer had the power to issue fines unilaterally. Her patrols were stripped of legitimacy. And without her iron grip, the HOA relaxed. It was as if a storm had finally passed. Walking home from that meeting, I couldn't help but grin. My battle wasn't just about saving a pool. It was about proving that even the loudest, bossiest Karen in the world can be undone with a little patience, some strategy, and a whole lot of poetic justice. The following weekend, I hosted a party of my own. Not a neighborhood free-for-all, not a declaration of war, just friends and family gathered around the pool, burgers sizzling on the grill, music drifting softly from a speaker. We toasted, we laughed, and we swam until the stars came out. At one point, I caught sight of Karen standing at the end of her driveway, arms folded, watching. She didn't storm over. She didn't wave her clipboard. She just stood there powerless as life moved on without her. And I realized then that was the sweetest revenge of all. Not her humiliation in front of the neighborhood, not the collapse of her flyers and fines, not even the empty pool stunt itself. The sweetest revenge was watching Karen fade into irrelevance, watching her realize that she was no longer feared, no longer respected, no longer in control. She had claimed my pool as hers. Instead, she lost everything. I leaned back in my chair, raised a glass of bourbon, and whispered to myself, "Cheers, Karen. Thanks for reminding me that sometimes the best way to win is to let the bully trip over her own crown." And with that, I took another sip, the sound of my family's laughter echoing across the waterproof that peace once stolen can be reclaimed. Looking back, I realized this story was never just about a pool. It was about boundaries, about how far someone will go when they think rules don't apply to them, and how important it is to stand firm when someone tries to take what's yours. Karen thought she could bully me with notices, twist the rules, and rally the neighborhood into submission. And for a while, I'll admit, she had me second-guessing myself. But here's the truth, bullies thrive on fear. The moment you stop giving them that power, their whole empire crumbles. Draining the pool wasn't just a prank, it was a symbol. A reminder that sometimes you don't have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes the smartest revenge is letting arrogance collapse under its own weight. Watching Karen promise the world and deliver an empty hole in the ground. That was justice no courtroom could ever give me. So here's the lesson I want you to take away. Protect what matters to you, even if others laugh, doubt, or threaten. Your home, your peace, your dignity, those are worth defending. And sometimes the most satisfying victory is simply standing your ground until the bully trips over their own lies. Now, I'm curious, have you ever dealt with a Karen who thought they could rewrite the rules? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of HOA drama and sweet revenge, hit that subscribe button and join us. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.